Chapter 1481 about enhancing your supernatural ability. Zhang Yi patted Fatty Su's shoulder hard after hearing his words. I knew that sooner or later there would be such a day. It's naturally best if you can understand. Feel free to mention whatever you need in the future. By the way, the Earth Centipede farm has developed well. I will provide you with an unlimited amount of origin. It doesn't matter if your talent is poor, we have a big family, we'll make it up to you until you can't absorb it. It doesn't matter if the base is poor, the most important thing is that you can understand that you have to become stronger before you can. In this world, everything could only rely on oneself. Zhang Yi had not interfered too much with Fatty Su in the past, nor had he forced him to definitely change his mindset and strive to become stronger. This was because it was very difficult to change one's nature. And becoming stronger can only be done if he realizes the necessity and works hard for it. Zhang Yi had given Fatty Su many chances. People would always recognize their insignificance and thus desire to be strong. However, if Fatty Su was slow to realize this, he would die on the battlefield sooner or later. Zhang Yi's heart was prepared for this. Fatty Su nodded as he was moved. Thank you, boss. However, I still have a question. He scratched his head. It's this kind of thing. Like supernatural ability, how exactly do I go about exercising it? He looked at his hands, his eyes a little puzzled. The current him, although his supernatural ability index had risen and his manipulation of ice and snow had been strengthened very much. However, his actual combat experience was too little, and he also lacked a systematic method to enhance his supernatural power. Zhang Yi frowned. This can only rely on myself to figure it out. I'm actually all about slowly thinking on my own and then combining experiments to develop new skills. Another thing is that imagination is important. To apply limited abilities to unlimited scenarios to form different abilities. Take Zhang Yi himself for example. The foundation of all his abilities actually originated from the three kinds of dimensional space: power of the void, power of time. By facing different opponents and combining abilities, one could have infinite possibilities. And the so-called systematic cultivation? Don't kid yourself. It had been less than 3 years since the end of the world had arrived, and everyone was just crossing the river by touching the stones. No one had a molded cultivation system. Boss, I understand. I'll enlighten myself. Fatty Su clenched his fists and said. Zhang Yi stroked his chin and pondered for a while, then said, there is someone you can ask, she may be more specialized than me in this area. Fatty Su's eyes lit up. Who is it? Your old flame, Liang Yan. Zhang Yi said with a smirk. Fatty Su was a little embarrassed. Aya, Jailda, you're saying that again. Talking about business. She's at least a high-level mutant in Xinjiang region, that place, and the current research on supernatural abilities is also the most forward. Perhaps she knows something that can give you help. Zhang Yi said as he put his arm around Fatty Su's shoulders, if you get any useful information out of her mouth, don't forget to share it. That's for sure. Fatty Su heatedly smiled. For the next period of time, Tianhai City was quiet as usual. There were no S-level missions in Jiangnan region that would bother Zhang Yi, and the outside world was even more irrelevant to him. During this period of time, through the construction of the Earth Centipede farm, the difficulty of raising the strength of low-level mutants was solved. Below Epsilon, under the cultivation mode of Yuan Stone Vein plus Earth Centipede, all of them could rapidly increase their strength. As for Zhang Yi's team's overall strength, it had improved by leaps and bounds in just 2 months' time. The current overall strength of the team was as follows: Zhang Yi 20,000 points, Flower 13,000 points, 9,500 points for Zhou Mu Yan 9,500 points, Fatty Su 9,000 points, Yu Jiguang 9,000 points, Yang Xian 9,200 points, Lu Karen 9,800 points, Liang Yu 9999, infinitely close to Epsilon. The light speed increase in the supernatural ability index was thanks to the development of the Earth Centipede farm. Of course, nowadays, they had only improved on the index level, but the few people from the actual combat faction, especially Fatty Sue, still needed to be tested by real battles. On the contrary, the auxiliary attribute mutants, such as Zhou Qir and Yang Xia, had instead improved at a fast rate because their abilities would be used frequently in their daily lives. Liang Yu had obtained the fragment of the Source of God, which was equal to obtaining the entrance ticket to Epsilon. But a true breakthrough still required settling down and getting a suitable opportunity. But as long as there were no surprises, her stepping into the Epsilon realm was secure. And what was more surprising was that Liu Karen's supernatural ability index reached 9,800 points after having absorbed a trace of the spirit of sacrifice, as well as a fragment of the Source of God. This made her ability even more powerful when parsing and reorganizing materials. The first thing she did was to recreate a whole set of weapons and equipment for Zhang Yi. Naturally, there was no need to mention that the firearms were further strengthened. However, currently, Zhang Yi's melee weapons were the ones that needed to be properly remodeled. I now have a humanoid weapon sword in the tree, which is more versatile and has regenerative properties, so there is no fear of being destroyed. The drawback is that it fears flames and has a slight attack ability. Holy Judgment has a stronger attack ability, but has a single ability. Is there a way to combine the two weapons into one? Zhang Yi had proposed such an idea to Liu Karen. After listening, Liu Karen thought for a long time and gave Zhang Yi her opinion. There's only one way if you want to do that. Turn the sword in the tree completely into a E-metal material composition. And although Bowser is brain dead, his body is still alive. This transformation has a considerable challenge and an extremely low success rate. She held her chin. If I wait until I reach the Epsilon level, I might be able to complete this transformation. In that case, brother, you will have the top-notch weapon in the world. Zhang Yi laughed. That would be excellent. Looks like I'll have to wait patiently for a while. The Source of God was no longer a mystery to him nowadays. If he could have the next opportunity to enter the secret realm, he would properly seek another one for Liu Karen. Liu Karen snapped his fingers, but there are alternatives available now. With my current ability, I can build nano-level robots. Use E-metal to build a large number of nanobots and infuse them into Bowser's body. That way, when he becomes a sword in the tree, his attack power will be greatly enhanced. And the fire resistance will also be enhanced. Zhang Yi waved his hand. You're the expert in weapons, just leave it all to you. He directly handed over the brain-dead Bowser to Liu Karen. And not long after, Liu Karen came out of the lab and excitedly handed Zhang Yi a dark silver-colored bracelet. Brother, this is the sword in the tree. Your new weapon. Zhang Yi swallowed his saliva. This is Bowser? Such a big guy, and now he's become like this. Liu Karen said, his body can turn into a plant, and as long as it retains its source area, it can regenerate. That's why the human form of the body doesn't matter. It's enough for me to use if I retain the necessary parts. Chapter 1482 Notes of the Sage. Zhang Yi put on the bracelet and experienced it. Now that Bowser was dead, only the sword in the tree built from the source of his body remained. The sword in the tree was stimulated through the electronic source on the bracelet, causing it to react and turn into a sharp sword. Zhang Yi, on the other hand, exerted unique control over it through the controller of the intelligent system. Activate super transformation. Zhang Yi gave the transformation command. In the next moment, the silver-gray bracelet immediately transformed, extending a dozen or so slender vines to bind his arm and began to actively draw energy. Then, it turned into a sword-like weapon made up of hundreds of vines just like before. Only now, it was no longer the green color of the plant, but was tinted with a layer of silver-gray, looking even more full of offensive power. Zhang Yi came to the outside of the manor and slowly raised the sword in his hand, the power of the void catalyzing him as he gripped the sword and swung it forcefully towards the front. The frozen Heron River in front of the manor exploded in an instant. Stretching thousands of meters from east to west, the ice layer that had already reached more than 10 meters thick turned into a sky of ice debris, rising hundreds of meters into the sky. The power of a sword was as terrifying as this. After enduring Zhang Yi's power, the performance of this sword in the tree too was not abnormal at all, and this alone made Zhang Yi very satisfied. Because as he became stronger and stronger, the requirements for the weapon would also become higher. A weapon that could grow infinitely was definitely the best choice. Zhang Yi, who had obtained a new weapon, spent a certain amount of time to adapt to it. And Lu Karen also used the remaining time to help the others to simply upgrade their weapon systems as well. Only, doing so was extremely time, energy consuming for her. After all, this kind of reconfiguration of the underlying matter that changed the atomic structure was not easy. Therefore, apart from Zhang Yi's weapon, when enhancing the weapons for the others, it could only be a simple enhancement. But even so, it gave them weapons with strength beyond ordinary Edelman alloys. On the other hand, after 2 months of closed-door research, Yang Xinxin finally cracked part of the contents of the sage's notebook by comparing the huge databases of the ancient and modern worlds, and through the memories of the flowers. Zhang Yi came to the control room, and at this moment, inside the control room, dozens of screens were lit up, and on top of them were densely packed information texts and pictures. Yang Xinxin was chewing a piece of chocolate in her mouth, staring intently at the screen in front of her. A smile appeared at the corner of her mouth when she noticed Zhang Yi walk in. "Brother, you came over." Zhang Yi nodded and walked next to her, pulling out a chair and sitting down. "I heard that you made a new discovery." Yang Xinxin nodded. "The cracking speed is a bit slow. After all, the information that can be compared is very scarce. But for now, this intelligence is very informative, I think." Yang Xinxin reached out and tapped a few times on the computer keyboard, and the screen in front of her immediately enlarged, the text on it all becoming streamlined. "Here, Sage's notes prove some of our previous guesses." Zhang Yi looked towards the screen, and under Yang Xinxin's interpretation, it allowed him to figure out the information recorded in the notes of the scholar sect. As the most learned man in Nash Kingdom, the notes of the scholar sect were undoubtedly the jewel of Nash Kingdom's literary treasury. Even with its limitations, it still had great reference value. It is not necessary to be completely convinced, but it is worth a look. According to the notes of the sage that had been partially translated over, the source of power of the so-called martial artist, or mutant, was the human being itself. In its inward-looking existence. The Nash Kingdom believes that people have souls. That's why they believe in reincarnation. The power of the soul is again divided into strong and weak. That is why the strong are born with powerful gifts, and have tremendous growth in their areas of expertise, naturally stronger than other individuals. Over the long years, Nash Kingdom gave birth to a means of collecting soul power. That was to build an altar to capture the souls when they were about to disappear, thus gathering power. And that altar was the Holy Spirit Temple at the highest point of Nash Kingdom. The people of Nash Kingdom believed that people would ascend to heaven after death, so the Holy Spirit Temple was constructed at the highest point of Nash Kingdom to facilitate the capture of the soul's power. When he saw this, Zhang Yi's heart was already shocked beyond containment. That one should be the spirit of sacrifice. Could it be that the spirit of sacrifice is a human soul that coalesces? But do people really have such a thing as a soul? If souls could be believed in, then wouldn't ghosts and gods really exist in the world? And right after that, the following translation made Zhang Yi frown again. It was written in the text, however, the legend of the Holy Spirit Temple had existed for thousands of years, yet people had never actually seen the shape of a soul. Much less have they seen the altar that collects souls exhibit any of its so-called prowess. Therefore, I, Albagereston, believe that the so-called altar and souls are just the ignorant thoughts of people over the past thousands of years. The book recorded up to this point, causing Zhang Yi to breathe a sigh of relief. It looked like no matter what kind of civilization, it had gone through a similar stage. For example, the communities on the surface of their planet had also constructed projects in the ancient times that had been greatly built due to a single thought of the ruler. The most typical one was the pyramid of the ancient kingdom of Kermit. When he thought of this, Zhang Yi immediately saw that after the large blank space below, a large number of emotionally charged written records suddenly appeared again. Notes of the Sage, August 21st of the new calendar year 3829 of the Nash Kingdom. The sky dome of the Nash Kingdom shook, and the glorious sky was tinted with purple, a beautiful luminescence that I had never seen before. And the Holy Spirit Temple, which had not been shaken for thousands of years, trembled violently on that day. I seemed to be wrong. Perhaps it did not exist just to boast of the feats of ancient kings. February 15th. 3830 of the new calendar year of the Nash Kingdom. With the arrival of the Day of Change, the Nash Kingdom changed dramatically. Among the kingdom, the number of martial talent possessors began to increase. Even many of the kingdom's warriors showed more power during the quiz. However, there was also a portion of the nationals who died en masse during this time, the cause of their deaths unknown. Could it be that the Holy Spirit Temple is really a tool to collect the souls of the dead? I'm getting more and more scared now, not that I'm worried that my decaying body will die. It's just that I'm worried that the kingdom of Nash will be overthrown as a result. Because among the records of the long-ago Epic of Albert, a similar sight appeared before the Three-Eyed Clan's last great destruction. March 5th, 3830 of the new calendar of the Nash Nation. I began to wonder about the reality of this world. Once again, I flipped through the Epic of Albert, which tells the story of Kagago, the master of all things, creating the world and destroying it. I began to suspect that everything in the myths and legends were not fabricated by people, but were past events that had really happened. Chapter 1483, The Real Doomsday. Zhang Yi finished reading this part of the deciphered notes of the sage, and was deeply shocked in his heart. According to the sage's analysis, the time when the Three-Eyed Clan had a large number of martial artists, or mutants, coincided perfectly with the arrival of the end times. And before that, although they also existed powerful individuals, they were far less terrifying than at this time. Even the Holy Spirit Temple's ability to collect spirit of sacrifice was only opened after the end times. The power to collect spirits. The Great Breaking. Also, I saw the name once again, Kagago. Zhang Yi covered his forehead, feeling that the inside of his brain was in chaos. There was too much information acquired in a short time, leaving him confused as to what exactly was going on. What's more, the limitations of the sage's thinking had to be taken into account, and these things were just his personal analysis, not necessarily the historical truth. Yang Xinxin said to Zhang Yi, "But right now, we can basically determine two things through the known intelligence." She slowly stretched out a finger and said earnestly, "First, the Holy Spirit Temple in Nash Kingdom and the Purple Pyramid underneath Qinling Mountain are similar energy collection devices. The source of God or the birth of the spirit of sacrifice is their masterpiece. But what are they collecting?" Yang Xinxin raised her head as if she was trying to penetrate the thick villa roof to look into the firmament. The sage said that the Holy Spirit Temple hadn't been activated for the past thousands of years. Until the end times came 2.5 years ago. The biggest event that happened in the outside world at that time, that is, the surface world where we survive, was the descent of the global freeze. Humans died in large numbers. Yang Xinxin looked at Zhang Yi. "Oh brother, I have a speculation in my mind. Do you want to hear it?" Zhang Yi rubbed his brow hard. "Speak." Yang Xinxin said, "Humans, themselves, possess a certain special energy field. Although it is impossible to be clearly informed of its source, it does exist. The great extinction brought about by the end times caused 95% of the humans on the planet to die, in addition to a large number of life forms dying. This power wandered out and existed in the middle of the planet. And the surviving humans absorbed this power, resulting in the emergence of large numbers of mutants. This point would be more in line with the mutants' means of promotion." She extended her own palm in a grasping gesture. by absorbing the power of supernatural life forms. It's almost like hunting. Then, hunting can capture their energy. The mass deaths caused by nature are the same thing. The underground world's communities, on the other hand, had long known that there would be such a moment in ancient times, and thus created devices to collect this special energy field. Yang Xinxin's analysis made a lot of sense, and Zhang Yi did not say anything, but just kept nodding silently. The overall idea was more or less the same as what he thought, but coming from someone else's mouth, it sounded much more logical and clear. Zhang Yi stroked his chin and said, I once heard a saying that the creatures on this planet had experienced 5 biological extinctions. Perhaps those underground communities are the 5 generations of humans that were once on the planet? It was difficult for Zhang Yi to describe them in terms of biology. After all, it seemed that their level of intelligence was in no way inferior to that of modern humans at the moment, and even outperformed modern humans in various other aspects. Yang Xinxin nodded. There is indeed such a possibility that exists. In order to avoid the plagues of this world, they abandoned the surface and entered a deeper world. If this planet was a house, they abandoned the walls and chose to enter within the house instead. It is because they know that the biological mass extinction will eventually come again. Zhang Yi bowed his head in deep thought. But suddenly, an inexplicable chill enveloped his entire body, causing a layer of white-haired sweat to rise on his back. If we analyze it according to this logic, doesn't it mean that none of the countless intelligent biological communities that ruled the planet over the past endless years have succeeded in defeating the unknowable end-time calamity? He looked down at Yang Xinxin. We will also face such a fate one day. It can be. He swallowed hard. We have clearly already survived the extreme cold of the Ice Age, leaving behind the fire of survival to be right. Yang Xinxin said calmly, that means that the real crisis is still far from coming. These words reached Zhang Yi's heart. In fact, he already had the answer in his heart, but he was just not quite willing to face it. Tough existences such as the Hades Gatekeeper with the White Dragon and the Nash King clan also had to choose to enter the underground world to hide. What kind of terrifying and unknown calamity was that? If that's the case, we must plan ahead. To make ourselves stronger. As well as, learn from them and create a refuge base in the deepest part of the underground. This was the first thing that came to Zhang Yi's mind. Perhaps back then, Fremons attempted to chisel through the earth, for the sake of not searching for ores. Rather, it was preparing for a future calamity. Yang Xinxin said indifferently, we don't have enough information in our hands yet, and all of this can only be guessed through the available information. And building a dungeon isn't that simple. One must find an excellent location point, ensure that there are sufficient underground resources, and have the technical means to at least predict the seismic patterns for the next few hundred years. And carve out a large enough underground city and make it unbreakable. This alone might require all the forces of the entire human race to be gathered together to make it possible. Zhang Yi thought of the 2 underground worlds he had visited. He had only been to the outer area of the White Dragon clan and had not gone deep at all. But the Nash Kingdom, that huge scale, was as huge as dozens of human cities. Even if mankind's technological level was quite high nowadays, without 100 years of time plus all the power of the entire mankind, it would not be possible to open it up at all. The more Zhang Yi thought about it, the more he felt that this matter was very difficult to handle. The biggest headache at the moment was that he was not at all sure what that final destruction that might come was. Ice, volcanic eruption, or a tsunami. These natural disasters were not the most frightening to him at the moment. That thing, it must be much scarier than all of them. After thinking about it, his eyes looked up to the ceiling. Xinxin, you say, is there a possibility we emigrate to the middle of the stars? He spread out his hands. Look, like the moon, or Mars, or something. Haven't humans long had plans to migrate to outer space? After Yang Xinxin thought for a while, she said to Zhang Yi very seriously, before the end of the world, human spaceflight technology wanted to do this somewhat reluctantly. Because it wasn't a short trip, but a long-term residence. But now, there is some possibility that exists. As for that possibility, it was the mutant. The mutation of humans allowed individuals to possess extraordinary intelligence, strength, and could turn many impossible things into possibilities. Chapter 1484 Escape Plan. Out of the habit of caution, Zhang Yi was already planning for the future. Escape. He had to escape. If in this world, there really existed an even more terrifying catastrophe that was enough to destroy an entire era's community that was about to happen, he would not be foolish enough to stay behind and fight against the catastrophe together. Escaping to a safe area with himself and those around him was his style of doing things. Zhang Yi rubbed his brow. Preparations must be made early. But whether it's building a dungeon or a space base, it's an extremely troublesome thing. It is difficult to reach in a short time based on our limited strength. It's really mind-numbing. Yang Xinxin analyzed, it's almost impossible for the underground city to be achieved by us alone. But a moon or Mars base, there exists a theoretical possibility. But the premise is to give us enough time to create a complete ecological chain on it. Otherwise, even if we are able to land, it will be difficult to survive for a long time. And, we need to think about future generations. This was not a short trip, it was much more troublesome than that. Suddenly, Yang Xinxin thought of something and raised her head to look at Zhang Yi, saying seriously, however, perhaps there is someone who can provide us with assistance. Zhang Yi looked at her, who is it? Yang Xinxin said calmly, Elon Freeman. Zhang Yi asked curiously, who is this person? The richest man in the world 30 years ago, the man known as Iron Man. He was planning to colonize Mars as early as 30 years ago and has made outstanding achievements in the field of spaceflight. Although in recent years, there have been fewer and fewer voices about him in the outside world. But many people believe that he has successfully created a human survival base on Mars and has taken his family to emigrate to Mars. Zhang Yi rubbed his chin, 30 years ago? Could it be that that fellow had known that such a day would come? Yang Xinxin said, in this world, the people with the most wealth and power were all preparing for the future risk of the end times in the middle of those years. For example, back then, the founder of Colombia's largest social media platform had purchased an island in the ocean to create a doomsday base. Zhang Yi let out a long sigh. It's a pity that Elon Freeman and I don't have any interactions. He's from Colombia. Even if I ask him to help, what reason would he have to help me? Yang Xinxin said, brother, your strength is your greatest capital. Zhang Yi took a deep breath. What Elon Freeman can do, we may not be unable to do. I don't like to pin my hopes on others, that would make me feel insecure. So we have to learn to rely on ourselves. He pinched Yang Xinxin's soft face. The skin of a 20-year-old girl was tender and smooth, it felt excellent in his hands. You continue to decipher the literature found underground and see if there are any more hints. I'll go find Kier and the others and discuss other things. Zhang Yi left the control room and went to find Zhou Kier and Lu Karen again. He did not hide anything and directly told the duo about his and Yang Xinxin's speculations. After hearing the news, the two women's faces really showed a shocked expression. The descent of the Ice Age is already enough to cause a biological mass extinction. Could it be that there are even more terrible things to come? Zhang Yi hugged his arms. No one knows what will happen in the future. That's why we have to take precautions before it happens. Zhang Yi looked at the duo. Both of your studies are more profound than mine. I think it's feasible to consider immigrating to space in the future, and the mechanical field needs to be taken care of by you, Karen. As for creating an ecosystem, it's up to you, Kier, to take care of it. Lu Karen was instantly excited. She clenched her fists and said, yeah. Flying into space and building a huge spaceship. Brother, this is something I've dreamed of. Zhang Yi laughed, feel free to mention anything you need to me. Whether it's materials or people, I will try my best to fulfill you. If Tianhai City isn't enough, I'll go find Zhu Zheng. He knew how hard aviation was to do. If Luke Karen wasn't a mutant, he wouldn't even dare to make such a request. Luke Karen thought about it and nodded cautiously. Brother, don't worry, today Huashu Kingdom has already mastered very perfect aerospace technology. It's not difficult to fly into space and land on Mars or the Moon. But I'm not going to build something as simple as that. We can consider directly building a large aerospace ship for space travel. How great would that be? The more Luke Karen thought about it, the happier she became, and her eyes began to twinkle with little stars. Zhang Yi rubbed his forehead. Safety first, pay attention, safety first. If something happens inside space, 100 lives won't be enough to waste. Human power was insignificant in front of nature, and in the middle of the vast universe, human Epsilon was like dust. Luke Karen scratched his head in embarrassment. Okay, big brother. Compared to the excited Luke Karen, Zhou Kir had long ago held her chin in one hand and began to ponder how to build an ecosystem. A perfect ecological circulation system needs to be built. An ecosphere? It needs to be more comprehensive than that. All the ecosphere ball plans in history have failed, but we have Zhang Yi's space ability to carry a large amount of supplies. The abilities of other mutants can also solve a lot of troublesome problems. With me here, there's no need to worry about medical issues either. This matter has a certain degree of feasibility. No, I still have to plan it carefully. It is indeed very challenging. Seeing the seriousness of the duo, Zhang Yi smiled gratefully. He said, do your best to do it. Everything is geared towards success, but never put too much pressure on yourself. What this world will become in the future, no one knows. I'm just making 2 preparations in advance as well. Besides, the fact that civilizations like Nash Kingdom as well as the other underground worlds managed to retain their fire showed that the catastrophe of the end times had not wiped out civilization completely. Perhaps there were other ways to circumvent it. Thinking too much would only bring troubles to oneself, and what needed to be done as a matter of urgency was still to raise the strength of oneself and the companions around them as soon as possible. And learn the truth of history. Zhou Kir raised her head and looked at Zhang Yi seriously, saying, Zhang Yi, if the future is really full of uncertain risks, I have a suggestion. Oh? What suggestion? Zhang Yi asked curiously. Zhou Kir said, nowadays, we are outside the other forces. You don't trust the people in the outside world, even the several bases that are already familiar with you, and those in Blizzard City. That's why you're minimizing your contact with them all. You don't get involved in the affairs of Blizzard City. Even the 3 major bases, you left them to manage on their own. But now the situation has changed. Our situation is not absolutely safe, so should we consider utilizing the power of others? Chapter 1485 A Force of One's Own. Zhang Yi blinked and fell into the midst of silence. Borrowing their power, was it? What Zhou Kir was talking about was not something so simple as cooperating with others. That meant that there would be more intersections. I've already started cooperating with the Deng family, so this is a kind of progress. Zhang Yi said with a smile. Zhou Kir shook her head and said to Zhang Yi, you must have your own power. She spread out her right hand and carefully analyzed it while Zhang Yi and Luke Karen both listened attentively. For example, if we really want to carry out an alien migration program, we will need a lot of human and material resources. You always like to rely on your own abilities because it's hard for you to trust others. But when the day comes when we are really in danger, it's only when there are many people that we can have great energy. That's why I think, shouldn't we take out the extra resources in our hands and cultivate some trustworthy people? Zhang Yi said, you mean the 3 major bases? Zhou Kir was right. The resources Zhang Yi held in his hands today were completely excessive. More than 20% of the Yuan Stone veins, those energy sources would be enough to support millions of people for decades if given to Blizzard City. How many people did Zhang Yi and his team have? Even later on, due to the excess yuan stone veins not being used up, they had all started to artificially feed Earth centipedes to cultivate mutants. But even so, this thing was only used by a few people in the family. That's why Zhang Yi had considered training another group of trustworthy dead soldiers. First of all, he would definitely choose from among the 3 major bases, those who had been tested over the years and had the value of cultivation without any rebellious bones. Zhou Qi, however, said, "First of all, we can cultivate them from the people around us. If the cultivation system matures in the future, we can also absorb outstanding talents from the outside world." Zhang Yi directly waved his hand, "Let's talk about this later. If a lot of disorganized people came to Tianhai City, it would definitely cause chaos. Which of the jackals out there are easy to tame? But what you said makes sense, we can indeed spare a little bit of resources to train the mutants of Tianhai City." As he said this, he even shook his head with a bitter smile. They're so pathetically weak right now. Zhang Yi had deliberately weakened the 3 bases in Tianhai City in the first place to avoid them rebelling one day. But right now, the main conflict was the outside world, so they could be allowed to become stronger. The pitiful 3 major bases, nowadays, even the base leaders were only at the level of ordinary members of the investigation team. Who would dare to believe that? After thinking about it, Zhang Yi decided to leave this matter to Yang Xinqin. Because she had the most meticulous mind and the best head. As for Zhou Qi, she was also smart, but in terms of management skills, she was still inferior to Yang Xinqin. Directly give them the use of Earth Centipede's origin to boost the strength of the 3 main base leaders. Then have them recommend the most reliable mutants under them and train them in batches. Hardiness comes first, and ability comes second. I don't want any rebels to exist under my men. Zhou Qi inquired of Zhang Yi, "Since it's a team that belongs to you, should we pick a name?" Zhang Yi simply thought about it briefly and arbitrarily settled on a name for this future Huashu Kingdom Iron Army. Shadow Ambush. It meant to lurk amongst the shadows and steadily live in the shadows. He didn't expect this troop to have a strong combat power, just that in the future, when he needed to build a base, this group of people would be able to help with the work, as a guard or something. However, the future direction of this unit was something he had not anticipated. Everything is just because Zhang Yi is too rich, so rich that he himself is not sure how much resources he has in his hands. At the very least, nowadays, the resources that he alone held were no less than half of a large region. The following days remained calm and quiet. If something heavenly didn't happen, in today's world, Epsilon was already in existence at the top of the pyramid, and wouldn't make a move easily. Only one morning, Zhang Yi received news from Blizzard City. He hadn't asked the Blizzard City side to provide him with this service, but Zhu Zheng, in order to show his trust in Zhang Yi, would have someone send him a copy of the latest electronic version of the world's news every day. The news was projected onto the 100-inch television on the wall. A piece of news made Zhang Yi a bit surprised. A few months ago, he had set off for the southwest region with his men. And at that time, the Star Island Misty Valley had already produced an anomaly, with the fog spreading out hundreds of kilometers. This unusual phenomenon had also made Zhang Yi nervous for a while. Later, when he entered the Nash Kingdom, he could basically confirm that a similarly powerful civilization definitely existed underneath Star Island as well. At that time, several of the neighboring powers had sent people over to investigate. This included the East Sea region. Zhang Yi thought that after this trip, if Vermilion Bird, Jianhan was able to survive, he would almost nail the coffin on becoming the second Epsilon-level mutant in the East Sea region. However, things had gone beyond his expectations. Because according to the intelligence, the second Epsilon of the East Sea region had indeed been born. But that person was not Vermilion Bird. Instead, it was Azure Dragon. That Azure Dragon, Su Xiaolong, who had once forcefully exploded his potential, temporarily breaking through to the Epsilon realm, and had only 5 years to live even after he was cured. According to the intelligence, he had resolutely joined this mission to explore Star Island after learning that he would not live long. And in the end, he surprisingly obtained a copy of the Source of God and broke through to the Epsilon realm. At this time, he had not only cured the dark wounds on his body, but his strength had also been increased by leaps and bounds. What a surprise! Zhang Yi muttered to himself in surprise. However, this kind of thing was always unexpected and reasonable. Which one of those who were able to survive until now after the end of the world was not a genius? Which one of them hadn't broken through countless obstacles and survived? Those who were weak, those who didn't have a background, would have died long ago. This fellow, really impressive. To be able to come this far on his own, perhaps his future achievements won't be any worse than Black Tortoise. Zhang Yi took a deep breath and sighed with emotion. This means that soon, the East Sea region will have 3 Epsilons. That's great! In comparison, the Jiangnan region could be a bit dismal. But those things had nothing to do with Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi walked to the window and looked out at the distant ocean. It was not visible here, but his heart had long since flown to the top of the island in the ocean that was shrouded in dense fog. Suddenly, a hideous face reflected into his mind. The cursed roar of the Sky Dragon King before he died resounded in his mind. Zhang Yi! I resent you. Ha ha! Did you think that everything would be over after you killed me? No, it doesn't. Sooner or later, you'll end up like me, it's your destiny. You've been marked, you can't escape, you'll definitely be caught by them and die a worse death than me. Zhang Yi's heart suddenly tightened and his brows deeply furrowed. Damn thing, even after dying, you still don't forget to curse me. It deserves to be taken as cat food by me.